Barklin Baker is the father. So Sarah and Mark are the smart ones, and Molly and I are the blonde. Stella is going to be 9 on September 4th. Dakota is 15, almost 16. My son Alexander's 20 now.
At just 14, Melanie Griffith was mauled in the face by a lion inside her own home. The young girl's face required dozens of stitches, leaving scars that would follow her for life. But that was only the beginning. A year later, while her classmates were still sitting in school, she dropped out to move in with Don Johnson, her mother's co-star, a man 8 years older than her. All of Hollywood was talking. Her youth took a turn few could have imagined. And yet the same girl who once walked out of a house filled with wild beasts and reckless choices would later become the shining star of Working Girl, winning a Golden Globe and earning an Oscar nomination. She was once the embodiment of the American dream, only to be swiftly cast aside by the very industry that created her, mocked with Razzie Awards, and dragged through headlines for her addictions and scandals. Melanie Griffith's life has been a cycle of falling and rising, again and again. From being labeled a bad mother to becoming a woman who, in the end, still managed to keep kindness toward the men who had walked away from her. This is not the story of a flawless star. It is the journey of a human being, one who stumbled, lost her way, yet never let go. Melanie Griffith was born on August 9, 1957 in New York City, into a family where fame arrived long before childhood could. Her mother, Tippi Hedren, was one of the brightest stars of the 1960s, forever remembered as the icy enigma in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds and Marnie. Beyond her film career, Tippi was also hailed as a fashion and feminist icon. Her father, Peter Griffith, was a former child actor who later became an advertising executive. When Melanie was just 4, her parents divorced. She moved with her mother to Los Angeles, into a complicated household with her stepfather, Noel Marshall, and 3 half-brothers. Her biological father remarried, giving her 2 more half-siblings. The constant changes, fragmented relationships, and emotional distance made her childhood unstable, a life without a true anchor. Her father's near-total absence left an emptiness that would later draw Melanie, almost unconsciously, toward older men, as if seeking the father figure she never truly had. Her early years were also marked by a bizarre and dangerous experiment. To prepare for the film Roar, her mother and stepfather raised over 100 wild animals on their property: lions, tigers, leopards, even elephants. They roamed freely through the house, treated like pets but carrying deadly instincts. Among them was Neil, a 400-pound lion who often slept in Melanie's bed and wandered casually from the kitchen to the living room. Noel Marshall was seen as fanatical, forcing the entire family to participate in the project despite the risks. Years later, Tippi would admit that letting wild animals roam inside their home was an act of unbelievable stupidity. The consequences came swiftly. During one filming session, Melanie was attacked directly in the face by a lion. The injuries required dozens of stitches and reconstructive surgery. Years later, she confessed to being haunted by the sound of roaring. Even distant echoes from a zoo would send her into panic and sleeplessness. A teenage girl, instead of being protected, had grown up surrounded by danger and fear. Even before that attack, the shadow of Hitchcock had already darkened her childhood. When Melanie was only 4, the legendary director, after being rejected by her mother, sent her a birthday gift: a small wooden coffin containing a wax doll molded with Tippi Hedren's face. The grotesque present etched itself into Melanie's memory, blending her childhood with fame, fear, and obsession. In that environment, Melanie grew up without anyone teaching her how to face the world. At just 9 months old, she was placed in a print advertisement, her first time in front of a camera. From then on, she appeared in background roles, becoming more familiar with film sets than classrooms. Surrounded by the chaos of adult lives but without any guidance, she began drinking alcohol at the age of 10, simply because everyone around her did, and no one stopped her. It was the first quiet slip into a pattern that would haunt her later years. Her mother, Tippi Hedren, was both an idol and a source of fear. Tippi was famous for standing up publicly to Alfred Hitchcock's controlling behavior, a bold act for any woman in that era. She was proud, independent, and courageous, but also a mother who often prioritized her career over family life. Melanie admired her strength, yet longed for tenderness, for hugs, for comfort. Deprived of emotional guidance, she learned to soothe herself with diary entries and rough sketches, small acts of control amid the chaos. At 14, Melanie followed her mother to the set of the Harrod experiment. Immersed in a world of bright lights and adult parties, she quickly found herself drawn into relationships inappropriate for her age. By 15, she dropped out of school, a decision that would send her life down a path with no way back. Those early years revealed a haunting truth. Melanie Griffith never had a real childhood. She grew up among wild beasts, within a fractured home, with a mother too strong and a stepfather too driven. Before she could understand what youth was meant to be, she had already been thrown into the adult world, where fame mattered more than feelings, and alcohol became the only escape. When Melanie Griffith stepped into Hollywood in the mid-1970s, she was still a fragile young girl already living under the scrutiny of the entire film industry. She didn't come to acting through formal training, nor from a lifelong passion, but simply because, as she once admitted, she liked the money from commercials. To the press, Melanie was merely Tippi Hedren's daughter, a pretty accessory that Hollywood was curious to place in front of a camera. In 1975 alone, she appeared in 3 films in a single summer: Night Moves, directed by Arthur Penn, The Drowning Pool, with Paul Newman, and Smile, with Bruce Dern. In each, she played variations of the same archetype, the sensual, rebellious, emotionally fractured young woman. Veteran directors saw in her a kind of strange spice, something to experiment with. But behind the lens, the reality was different. Still under 18, she was being placed in nude and sexual scenes, and when the camera stopped rolling, the young girl often broke down in tears. A friend later recalled that Melanie never felt seductive the way the press portrayed her. She only felt exposed, lost amid a world of adults moving too fast and too fiercely. On the set of The Drowning Pool, she often hid quietly in the background, too intimidated to speak to Paul Newman. Noticing her shyness, Newman approached her and said gently, "Just be yourself. Don't try to prove anything. The audience will feel it." For Melanie, those words became a lifelong memory, one of the few moments when she felt seen as an actress rather than merely her mother's daughter. But Hollywood offered more cruelty than comfort. In Smile and One-on-One, many of her scenes were cut. She appeared so briefly that audiences barely remembered her name. Looking back, Melanie admitted that this invisible phase taught her how to survive. She learned to hold her ground on set, even knowing her work might never make it to the screen. In 1977, Joyride gave her another rebellious role. But what lingered wasn't the movie itself, it was the chaos behind it. The film's production blurred into nights of endless parties, where a vulnerable young woman laughed freely, yet could burst into tears at the slightest remark. That fragility made people adore her and exploit her. Beneath the image of a world-weary 20-something, she was still deeply insecure. Around this time, Melanie and her boyfriend Don Johnson openly lived together in Laurel Canyon. They adopted dogs, dreamed of a small family, and became tabloid fixtures as Hollywood's wild young couple. To legitimize her growing visibility, she was named Miss Golden Globe in 1975, a symbolic title often given to the children of celebrities, reminding everyone that her path to the spotlight was paved as much by her lineage as by her talent. Those early years did not make Melanie Griffith a star, but they shaped something far more enduring: The resilience of a young woman forever wrestling with confusion, the shadow of her mother, and the seductive chaos of Hollywood. It was a foundation built on pain, yet it forged the strength she would need for the explosion that came next. After Something Wild, Melanie Griffith's name suddenly became hot in Hollywood. But it wasn't until Working Girl, 1988, that she reached her true turning point. Under the direction of Mike Nichols, Melanie transformed into Tess McGill, a humble secretary who dared to rise above prejudice and prove her intelligence and ambition in the cold, male-dominated world of finance. The role was more than just a performance. It was the voice of a generation of American women seeking their place in the 1980s. Melanie portrayed Tess with delicate sensitivity, yet beneath it all was an unshakable will. For the first time, the fragility that once made her seem weak became her greatest strength. 2 years earlier, her bold performance in Something Wild had already earned her the New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Actress, one of the most prestigious critical honors in the U.S. It was the first acknowledgement from the industry that Melanie was not just a pretty face riding on her mother's fame, but a genuine talent who could turn her chaos into art. With Working Girl, she took a giant leap forward. The film grossed over $100 million worldwide, received 6 Oscar nominations, and brought Melanie both a Golden Globe win and an Oscar nomination for Best Actress. She stepped onto the stage surrounded by flashbulbs, no longer the beautiful but troubled girl, but a true actress. For a brief moment, she felt that Hollywood had finally accepted her for her talent, not her body. But the spotlight faded faster than she expected. Just a few years later, her career choices began to send her downhill. Pacific Heights, 1990, still held some tension thanks to its strong script, but it wasn't enough to sustain her momentum. Reuniting with Brian De Palma for The Bonfire of the Vanities, once hyped as the blockbuster of the decade, turned into a box office disaster. Critics attacked not only the film, but also Melanie herself, calling her dull, lifeless, a redundant shadow among fiery co-stars. From there, her career became a series of collisions. Shining Through, 1992, was dismissed as illogical and shallow. Born Yesterday, 1993, cast her as a soulless imitation of Judy Holliday. Milk Money, 1994, in which she played an unconvincing sex worker, alienated audiences entirely. At her lowest point, Melanie became a frequent target of the Razzie Awards, once even receiving 2 nominations in the same year. For a woman who had stood on the Golden Globe stage just a few years before, it was a brutal fall back to earth. Still, there were faint glimmers of light. In Nobody's Fool, 1994, opposite Paul Newman, she earned rare praise for her subtle, sincere performance. Buffalo Girls, 1995, saw her as a tough cowgirl and unexpectedly brought her another Golden Globe nomination, this time for television. And by the end of the decade, HBO's RKO 281, 1999, a behind-the-scenes look at Citizen Kane, earned her both Emmy and Golden Globe nominations for portraying Marion Davies, a misunderstood actress much like herself. There was something poetic about it. Both Melanie and Davies had been underestimated by an industry that never truly saw who they were. Yet those bright spots couldn't erase the failures. In 1999, Melanie and her husband Antonio Banderas took a family gamble with Crazy in Alabama. Banderas directed, Melanie starred. The story, about a Southern woman fleeing an abusive marriage while carrying her husband's severed head in a hatbox, was meant to mark their creative rebirth. But instead of applause, they met with disappointment. Critics called the film overambitious and out of control, and audiences turned away. For Melanie, it was a deep fracture, from Oscar contender to someone struggling to reclaim her standing. For Banderas, it was a harsh lesson for a first-time director. And for both, Crazy in Alabama closed a decade of hope, mixed with heartbreak. After 2000, Melanie Griffith kept searching for herself. In 2003, she surprised everyone by stepping onto the Broadway stage as Roxy Hart in Chicago. It was the first time audiences saw her outside her cinematic comfort zone. Though it wasn't a career-defining performance, it proved she still had the courage to take risks, to stand before a live audience where there were no second takes. In her 40s, that took remarkable bravery. By the late 2000s, Melanie Griffith's place in Hollywood had faded. She had reached the top, crashed to the bottom, yet remained, if only as a memory of a brief but blazing moment when she burned brighter than anyone could have imagined. If on screen, Melanie Griffith reached her peak with Working Girl, then off-screen, in those very same years, she was living inside another whirlwind, a love story that was public yet secretive, fated yet stormy. It was her lifelong entanglement with Don Johnson. Their bond was planted early, when teenage Melanie first met Johnson on the set of The Herod Experiment. Few people knew how open the relationship really was. At just 15 or 16, Melanie was already spending weekends publicly with Don, to the fury and helplessness of her mother, Tippi Hedren. Rather than forbid it, Tippi could only stand by, anxious and powerless, watching her daughter live out a love the world saw as too young to be right. By 18, Melanie and Don had moved in together in Laurel Canyon, the lush, bohemian neighborhood of Hollywood's elite. They adopted dogs, bought a small house, and lived like newlyweds, hiding nothing. "We weren't sneaking around. From the very start it was open," Johnson recalled. He even added half-jokingly, "Our first time wasn't in the back seat of a car like our parents' generation." Melanie, for her part, said, "Loving Don since I was 14 saved me from the pain of dating other guys. Boys and are stupid. It was innocence, mixed with rebellion." Don Johnson, already an adult, later admitted it felt a little strange to drive to school just to pick up his teenage girlfriend. To outsiders, their relationship was scandalous. But for Melanie, it was a world of our own, a makeshift family that replaced the chaos of the home she grew up in. Behind the media glare, things were far from simple. Melanie was expelled from a Catholic school for questioning religion, then finished high school at the Hollywood Professional School, a haven for the rebellious kids of the entertainment world. She and her classmate Mackenzie Phillips often skipped classes, forging excuse notes claiming they had to be on film sets. That environment, along with Don's constant presence, only pushed Melanie further away from a normal adolescence. Meanwhile, Tippi Hedren, worried yet powerless, complained that her daughter was growing up too fast, while admitting that Melanie was always more mature than anyone her age. She hoped time would grant her daughter some spiritual awakening before marriage and motherhood. But love carried Melanie and Don too far, too quickly. They dreamed aloud about making films together, or even leaving Hollywood behind to become farmers. To the two young lovers, the future shimmered with promise. In truth, it was only youthful illusion. On Melanie's 18th birthday, they got engaged. The next day, they flew to Las Vegas and got married. The marriage lasted only 6 months. Later, Johnson admitted that he had spent most of the night before the wedding with former Miss World Marjorie Wallace, a confession that only deepened the public sense that their relationship had begun too soon, too fragile to survive. After the divorce, they went silent. But the connection between them never truly disappeared. Nearly 13 years later, in 1989, they remarried in a private ceremony at a ranch in Aspen, with Don Johnson's 2 sons from previous relationships serving as ring bearers. By then, both were stars in their own right. Don had become a household name through Miami Vice, while Melanie had just won a Golden Globe for Working Girl. But behind the glamorous facade lay a more complicated truth. Both had battled alcoholism, and Johnson was rumored by the press at the time to still indulge in hard partying and extramarital affairs. His name was linked to Barbra Streisand, Uma Thurman, and even Penelope Ann Miller, some of Hollywood's most prominent women of the era. Still, Melanie chose to believe. She said, "I think some relationships are meant to be, and this might be one of them." 3 months after the wedding, their daughter, Dakota Johnson, was born. Yet, just like the first time, cracks began to appear. In 1994, Melanie Griffith filed for divorce again, citing irreconcilable differences. She admitted, "We had grown in different directions." Some reports claimed that Johnson's lingering affairs and personal instability continued to erode their marriage from within. Despite the split, they remained respectful toward each other. Johnson said, "When you love your children and want to be in their lives, it's wrong to diminish their mother. Kids learn more from what you do than from what you say." The relationship between Melanie Griffith and Don Johnson had begun too early and endured through cycles of passion, doubt, reconciliation, and release. It was no longer a perfect love story, but rather proof of love's true complexity, where people can walk away, look back, and still owe each other a quiet kind of kindness in the end. After the whirlwind years with Don Johnson, that reckless, public, and scandal-tinged first love, Melanie Griffith turned a new page with Steven Bauer. This time, there were no tabloid explosions, no breathless headlines. It felt more like a pause, an experiment in finding peace after chaos. Steven Bauer, a Cuban immigrant with sharp features and quiet magnetism, had just risen to fame for his role as Manny in Scarface, 1983. He was everything Don wasn't, less scandalous, less indulgent in wild nights, and far more grounded, a quality that made Melanie believe she had finally found stability. More than a partner, Bauer became the first person to encourage her to study acting seriously. He pushed her to train with the legendary Stella Adler in New York, reminding her, "Beauty fades, but your craft remains." They married in 1981, not long after Melanie's breakup with Don. Soon after, they welcomed a son, Alexander, born in 1985. To their friends, Melanie seemed transformed, calmer, more family-oriented, trying to live as the grown woman she had never been allowed to become. During her classes with Adler, she once broke down in tears when told to abandon her reliance on appearance and bear her rawest emotions. Yet that emotional shock awakened her. She realized she needed a foundation stronger than the label of the rebellious girl who once married Don Johnson. With Bauer's quiet support, Melanie entered a new creative phase with defining roles in Body Double, 1984, and Something Wild, 1986. Though he wasn't by her side on every red carpet, Bauer was the steady force pulling her out of the reckless spiral of her youth. But Hollywood rarely allows a domestic dream to last. When Steven Bauer's career slowed after Scarface while Melanie's star began to rise, the cracks surfaced. He longed for stability. She was drawn deeper into demanding high-profile roles. The growing divide gradually pulled them apart. By 1987, they separated, without scandal or bitterness. It was a quiet ending, but one that taught Melanie a painful truth. Peace was never going to come easily to her. With Steven, she found tenderness and motherhood, but not long-term harmony. For her, the marriage was a trial run, a brief attempt at normalcy before fate inevitably drew her back toward the kind of fiery love she could never resist. After that gentle yet fleeting marriage to Steven Bauer, the man who urged her to rebuild from the ground up, Melanie Griffith once again returned to Don Johnson, only to later step into a completely new chapter of her romantic life. And this time it wasn't youthful recklessness or a short-lived calm. It was a love story that would make all of Hollywood look up and take notice. Antonio Banderas fell for Melanie Griffith at first sight at the 1989 Academy Awards. At the time, he was a rising Spanish star, while she was a newly Oscar-nominated actress, attending the ceremony with her husband, Don Johnson. "I saw this woman in a cream-colored dress, wearing pearls, and I had to ask Pedro Almodovar who she was," Banderas recalled. Their first conversation was brief but unforgettable. He asked her age, a question Melanie later called the rudest thing anyone had ever asked me. Yet somehow, that awkward moment left them both remembering each other. 6 years later, fate brought them together again on the set of Too Much, 1995. By then, both were married, but the attraction was undeniable. "We tried to be respectful, but it was impossible," Banderas later admitted. Within a year, they had divorced their previous partners and married each other in a quiet London ceremony. No extravagance, no press frenzy. In September 1996, they welcomed their daughter, Stella. The Griffith-Banderas family quickly became one of Hollywood's most admired couples, elegant, affectionate, always appearing hand in hand at every event. But behind the harmony, cracks quietly began to show. While filming Evita with Madonna, who had openly confessed her admiration for him, Banderas became the center of a media storm about Melanie's supposed jealousy. Pregnant at the time, she often visited the set until she was eventually banned from it. "I was hurt by that," Melanie recalled years later. "Suddenly, I was painted as this paranoid wife, when all I wanted was to be near my husband." The story exploded across tabloids. Madonna later denied any affair, saying, "I wish I had Antonio," but Melanie never left his side. Though they weathered the scandal, the fractures lingered. After nearly 2 decades together, in 2014, Melanie Griffith filed for divorce. She said she no longer suffered from her epileptic seizures. "Because I'm divorced now, and I'm not stressed anymore." Antonio's response was nothing but grace. "I will love her until the day I die," he said. They separated with love and friendship. Melanie kept their Aspen home and received $65,000 a month in support. Yet there was no bitterness, no blame. They remained close, still appearing together for their daughter Stella, still speaking with affection and respect. And that, perhaps, is one of the most beautiful things to have emerged from Melanie Griffith's turbulent life. A woman who once had everything, lost it all, and still managed to keep what mattered most: forgiveness from both sides, after a love that once burned bright. Fame came early, but the price Melanie Griffith paid arrived just as fast, like an addiction in every sense of the word. By the late 1980s, Hollywood's cameras had turned away from her performances and toward her private life. It wasn't only the love scandals they chased, but the battles, brutal, cyclical, with alcohol, drugs, and the crushing weight of fame. Melanie never hid it. She once admitted she began drinking at just 10 years old, sipping wine like soda to fill the void of a childhood starved of unconditional love. Coke, alcohol, they give you a feeling, a rush that replaces what you should have had when you were little, she told Vanity Fair in 1994. From there, her life became a loop of collapse and recovery. Rehab in 1988, again in 2000, and once more in 2009, a fight without end. What shocked the public most was that even at the height of success, holding a Golden Globe on the red carpet, Melanie could still break down in private. Director Mike Nichols, during the filming of Working Girl, 1988, reportedly pulled her aside and warned her after she arrived on set intoxicated. 3 weeks later, she checked herself into the Hazelden Clinic in Minnesota, her first real turning point. But the tragedies didn't stop. In a 2002 More magazine interview, she confessed that she once allowed her 16-year-old son, Alexander, to try marijuana. Her reasoning, she said, was warped but maternal. "I thought it was safer to let him smoke at home than buy something on the street that could kill him." The confession caused an uproar, and the tabloids branded her a bad mother. Alexander was soon enrolled in a 12-step recovery program. Rumors also circulated that she had placed her daughter Dakota in therapy as a teen. Griffith denied it, but admitted a painful truth. She needed space to breathe, and I respected that. For a child raised among separations, reconciliations, and more separations, the damage came not from shouting, but from dinners eaten in silence. Ironically, it was Don Johnson, the same chaotic love, who helped her stand back up once. When they reunited in 1989, he had been sober for 5 years and encouraged her to seek the same strength. By the 2000s, when Melanie struggled with painkiller addiction after a neck injury, it was Antonio Banderas who stood beside her. In a 2002 interview with Diane Sawyer, Antonio spoke with disarming honesty. "I didn't see her as someone in denial. She faced it, and things have gotten much better." Rehab became almost rhythmic, a grim pulse in her life. Her representative told People in 2009 that her latest stay was merely to reinforce her commitment to healthy living. But in truth, it revealed the relentlessness of a disease that had shadowed her for 3 decades. The turmoil left its marks not only on her heart, but also on her skin. A gallery of tattoos, a heart with Antonio, a golden pear on her hip, Don Johnson's nickname for her, and a small marijuana leaf near her ankle. The smallest tattoo was the most haunting, a reminder of what she once couldn't control, herself. But time, as always, changed everything. When her marriage to Antonio Banderas ended after nearly 20 years, Melanie covered the heart with a crossword puzzle design spelling the names of her 4 children: Alexander, Dakota, Jesse, and Stella. It was a quiet but powerful statement. Romantic love fades, but family endures. 4 marriages ended, yet there was no bitterness. Melanie continued to appear alongside her ex-husbands at Dakota's graduation, smiling in shared photographs. Antonio Banderas, even after the divorce, still called her "my best friend" and declared, "I will love her until the day I die." And Melanie, instead of erasing her past, etched a new chapter on her skin so her children could see that mistakes need not be hidden. They can become part of the family's story. Perhaps that's what makes Melanie Griffith truly different. She never tried to hide her scars. She chose to live with them, so her children would understand that some mistakes are never meant to be repeated. Melanie Griffith's 4 marriages left behind 3 children, and each of them reflects a different fragment of what their mother gained and lost along the way. Alexander Bauer, her eldest son with Steven Bauer, experienced the darker side early when his mother let him try marijuana at 16. What she thought was safer to smoke at home became a lasting scar. Alexander had to enter a 12-step rehabilitation program. Stella Banderas, her youngest daughter with Antonio, took the opposite path, choosing privacy, distance, and silence, nearly disappearing from Hollywood altogether, as if determined to escape the cycle that had trapped her mother. But the one who carried the heaviest weight and drew the world's attention was Dakota Johnson. Born at the eye of a media storm, Dakota grew up amid back-to-back divorces, paparazzi flashbulbs, and endless travel with no real sense of home. One year, she studied in a hotel in Budapest. Another, she was homeschooled, with no steady circle of friends. At school, classmates passed around tabloid clippings about her parents, reading them aloud like jokes. Dakota said nothing, but the wounds went deep. She began therapy early, not for any specific diagnosis, but to breathe amid the chaos of a household where alcohol, drugs, separations, and reconciliations swirled together endlessly. Melanie denied ever sending her daughter to rehab, but she admitted she needed a place to breathe, and I respected that. Dakota grew up surrounded by her parents' mistakes. Mistakes lived in public, but refused to let them define her. She didn't attend Juilliard. She didn't inherit leading roles through her family's fame. Instead, she accepted bit parts, appearing for mere seconds in the social network, enduring rejection, moving slowly, deliberately. And then, 50 Shades of Grey turned her into a global star, no longer the daughter of Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith, but Dakota Johnson herself, independent, composed, and in control of her own image. Melanie once confessed, "I didn't give my daughter an ideal childhood, but I always told her the truth." Perhaps in a family where mistakes were never hidden, what Dakota carried forward and built upon was the rare ability to remain calm amid turmoil. She learned to turn scars into armor, to transform a fractured childhood into the strength to stand on her own. Maybe Dakota's greatest power isn't escaping her past, but carrying it with her, gracefully, proving that even within the wreckage, a person can still build identity, purpose, and their own light. After decades of turmoil in her personal life and career, Melanie Griffith faced another formidable challenge, this time one that threatened her very appearance and identity: skin cancer. In 2009, she was diagnosed with basal cell carcinoma, BCC, a common form of skin cancer that can become invasive if not treated early. The tumor was located on her face, requiring surgical removal. Post-surgery photos showed one eye bruised and swollen. What many mistook for an accident was, in fact, the aftermath of the operation. For an actress whose livelihood depended on her face, it was a devastating blow. Later, Melanie admitted, "It's scary when you're an actor and your face is what you rely on to work." But the ordeal didn't end there. In 2017, the cancer returned. This time, she underwent dermabrasion surgery to reconstruct the skin on her nose after cancerous cells were removed. She shared unfiltered photos of herself online, her nose bandaged, makeup-free, not for attention, but to raise awareness. Her message was simple yet urgent. Use sunscreen, get regular checkups, and never ignore the changes you see in your body. Though the illness wasn't life-threatening, it demanded something else entirely: patience and courage. The strength to face the public again with an imperfect face. In an interview with InStyle, she said, "I realized I just had to put a Band-Aid on. I looked kind of silly, but it was okay." A lighthearted remark, masking years of quiet treatments, fear, and anxiety over her looks, her career, and the gaze of the world. Fortunately, the cancer was caught early. Doctors confirmed that the 5-year survival rate for non-metastatic BCC is nearly 100%. Yet for Melanie, the greater victory lay in awareness. She turned her own story into a reminder, a message about the importance of protecting your skin, getting regular screenings, and taking even the smallest symptoms seriously. Throughout it all, family and friendship remained her anchor. Griffith has often expressed gratitude for the love of her children, and for her 3 ex-husbands, who continued to support and comfort her through the darkest days. "I love all 3 of my ex-husbands and we're all very close," she once said. And it wasn't a joke, but a testament to a network of care that helped her stay strong. Her battle with cancer may not be the most dramatic chapter of Melanie Griffith's life, but it is perhaps the most profound, a quiet, steadfast one. It's where the world no longer saw a blonde movie star on the red carpet, but a woman who dared to confront herself, cell by cell, and chose to keep living, stronger and kinder than ever before. Melanie Griffith was never the classic Hollywood ingenue. While the world adored the flawless grace of women like Grace Kelly and Audrey Hepburn, Melanie carved her place in history through her scars. Her allure came not from perfection, but from honesty. A woman both fragile and fierce, soft yet explosive. Her career was a paradox. She once won a Golden Globe and earned an Oscar nomination, yet also landed 7 Razzie nominations. Critics have long debated her acting, but what's undeniable is that she pushed boundaries many others feared to touch. And in those very debates, her name endured, because no one wastes time arguing about the forgettable. Her influence extended beyond herself. Once a Miss Golden Globe, she later passed that same title to her daughter, Dakota Johnson, making them the only mother-daughter pair in history to share the honor. It wasn't merely an award, It was a legacy, proof that influence can be inherited, even when it's etched in mistakes. Off-screen, Melanie preserved a quieter, more humane side of herself, one untouched by scandal or fame. She raised funds for her mother's Shambhala Preserve, a sanctuary for rescued wild animals, and supported programs for children recovering from burns. She did so without fanfare or image polishing, quietly reminding the world that behind the makeup and the smile was a heart that still cared deeply. Melanie Griffith's legacy is not perfection. It's proof of resilience. She represents a generation of women who dared to live honestly, to fail openly, and to rise again. To Hollywood, she remains a reminder. Fame fades, but individuality does not. And sometimes a scar tells more truth than a flawless face ever could. At 67, Melanie Griffith continues to lead a vibrant, meaningful life, one no longer centered around fame, but illuminated by mindfulness, generosity, and the quiet joy of simply being herself. In 2025, she marked her return to the screen as the narrator in By Design, directed by Amanda Kramer and premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Though she appeared only through her voice, Melanie captivated audiences with that signature smoky tone and an enduring artistic spirit. Critics praised the film, noting how her presence, even unseen, carried emotional weight, a reminder that her creative spark has never dimmed. In her personal life, Griffith remains the emotional anchor of her family. In August 2024, she joyfully announced the engagement of her youngest daughter, Stella Banderas, to her childhood friend Alex Gruzinski. Melanie called it a beautiful beginning to a love story that started in kindergarten, sharing the tender, tearful moment of the proposal on social media. Earlier in 2025, Melanie and Stella were temporarily forced to leave their Los Angeles home due to devastating wildfires that displaced hundreds. Despite the danger, she stayed optimistic, posting updates and encouraging her community to support one another through the crisis. One of her most heartfelt public moments came in January 2025, when she celebrated her mother Tippi Hedren's 95th birthday. In a short Instagram video, the legendary The Birds actress smiled, blew out her candles, and waved cheerfully at the camera. "My beautiful mama just turned 95. She's healthy, happy, and full of life," Melanie wrote. A simple but powerful tribute to the resilience of 3 generations of women who had weathered storms together and still stood strong. Beyond art and family, Griffith continues to use her voice for advocacy. Having battled basal cell carcinoma twice, in 2009 and 2017, she actively supports cancer awareness campaigns, including Cycle for Survival, which raises funds for rare cancer research. Her openness about her fears, surgeries, and recovery after removing cancer cells from her nose has inspired others to take skin health seriously. More than a medical story, it's become a declaration of courage from a woman who once made her face her livelihood, and later, her lesson in self-acceptance. The Melanie Griffith of today is no longer the sex symbol of a bygone era, nor the star defined by roles or marriages. She is a devoted mother who loves her children unconditionally, a woman who has stumbled and stood up more than once, and now someone who lives slowly, fully, treasuring every moment as if even the last rays of sunset deserve to be cherished. And perhaps her greatest legacy now is this quiet reminder: when the stage lights fade, what endures is not the glory, but how we have loved, fallen, and risen again, true to ourselves. Melanie Griffith never left behind a perfect image for Hollywood. What she left was something truer, the reminder that a person can fall, fail, and still have the right to stand up and rewrite their own story. For parents, her life also offers a quiet lesson. The most precious gift isn't raising children within perfection, but showing them the truth, both the light and the darkness, so they can grow stronger than we ever were. So what about you? Should Melanie Griffith be remembered as a victim of Hollywood's cruelty, or as a woman who turned fragility into strength and kept walking forward. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because in the stories to come, we'll bring you even deeper, more honest, and surprising journeys.